Just to start, can you say and spell your first and last name for me so we get your pronunciation right?
Sure. Teresa Ewins. And the first name is Teresa. Last name is Ewins.
If you were chosen to be the next police chief of Lincoln, what would you say your number one goal for the department would be?
Number one goal for the department really is to, one, get to know all the officers and really learn from them, but also bridging that with the community. I mean, that has to go in tandem. So the number one goal is to understand Lincoln. I learned a lot today about the department, and I'm very impressed by Lincoln and what they do currently. So really, it's to learn.
Across your time in law enforcement, you've worn a bunch of different hats. How will maybe that experience play into this role that you haven't had before but been pretty high up in a lot of different areas?
You know, my experience is it is a lot in 26 years. You know, from being in operations, being on the street a lot, working with communities, our officers, and doing reform. Reform is very important, and my experience does come in handy in this situation right now in 2021 because of everything that's going on. Police departments have to continuously challenge themselves, assess themselves to see if we are serving the community the way it should be done. Lincoln has been doing that. They actually have been looking at trends and how to improve, and so it actually is a natural fit.
So, kind of a two-part question. What brought you to Lincoln? And then, after you're done answering that question, I'll go with my second one.
Okay.
That way you don't forget my second one.
Yeah, I probably will do that. Thank you. I appreciate that. What brought me here was I had a conversation with somebody at PERF that was doing the search for the next chief, and I liked what they had to say, to be honest with you. It's not something that I was necessarily looking for, but you know, right now in my career, I'm towards the end of my career after 26 years, and it really piqued my interest.
So, this is my second question. What is your stance on body cameras worn by officers, and especially, you know, if you're made police chief, you know, what changes would you make to releasing body camera footage to the public and the media after, you know, an incident?
Okay, so my stance on body-worn cameras is that it is a great tool for law enforcement. The public gets to see the interaction between the officer and the community, whoever they're interacting with. That's very important, and that was really misunderstood way back when because all you could rely on was really a police report. And body-worn cameras is a great tool because you do see positive interactions as well as negative interactions in which the officers have to respond to. And what they do, it helps with training as well for body-worn cameras. And really, it's a great tool that was added.
So, you would be in favor of releasing body camera footage to the public as soon as possible? Is that what I'm hearing?
As soon as possible, it has to be done. There has to be a process in place in which I need to consult with the city attorney as well as the DA's office to make sure that we don't have any problems with the investigation itself. But overall, getting ahead of anything that the public really needs to know is something that I will do, whether it is me speaking to the media and getting the messaging out or body-worn cameras.
I know you championed that bias-free policing policy in San Francisco. What would you do if you were named chief to address racial bias in policing here?
We'll first examine everything that's been already done. The bias policing, you know, there's so many different layers to it. And so we need to really look at what's already done and the courses that are already being taken by law enforcement, but having continuous training is very important. And we talk about explicit or implicit biases. Everyone needs to learn, because academics, everyone that you interact with knows that implicit bias exists for everyone. And it doesn't matter what job you're in. Even the media, that happens as well. You know, everyone has to look at their implicit biases and really address them. But in law enforcement, obviously, it comes to understanding what we do day to day. Supervision is extremely important, but also looking at body-worn cameras is a good example. but really addressing it is a priority, and it is in law enforcement in general. So I hope I answered your question, Amanda.
Speaking on those lines, diversity is a big thing.
Yep.
So kind of talk about how you would champion diversity in the police force here in Lincoln.
Recruiting, getting out and recruiting. I mean, that's the most important part. I think the academic institutions that are just here in Lincoln itself, there's plenty of people that we can go and recruit. Our own members are great recruiters. We have to pay attention and really invest in our personnel, because if we don't invest in our personnel, then the message isn't going to get out there. We have to be fair. We have to be diverse, like you're saying, but really it's about doing the work and getting the messaging out.
When it comes to that recruitment, a lot of times you see we're losing officers to places close like Omaha. Is there ways that you would cultivate the culture or make it maybe more attractive to someone who's torn between the two by coming in to choose Lincoln over maybe a larger force or a different force in Nebraska?
Lincoln Police Department is extremely professional. I mean, that's what I've seen. And I know it's been only a day that I've sat with all of them, including the command staff. A choice for somebody that's looking at this career is, what kind of police officer do you want to be? Investing in our officers is critical in that part. And so if you're making a decision right now to be in law enforcement, being in the Lincoln Police Department is a better choice.
Speaking sort of on recruitment too, I asked this question yesterday to the other candidate. What is your thought on hiring or engaging with mental health partners in terms of being on the police force and going out to calls where there may be somebody in mental distress, instead of sending an officer or maybe with a team of officers? That's something that I think is starting to come to a head in this country.
Right. First of all, that's a great question, because we're all dealing with it. The subject of mental health, how we've been approaching it in San Francisco is a very positive way. We have a team that's focused on really tracking individuals that are frequent in our system, and so they check in with the mental health clinicians. They work very closely with them. I think part of my concern in regard to sending only clinicians to some calls for service is that it's dangerous. You can't predict what's going to happen. So I'd much rather see a system in which we partner with clinicians and we go out together and really get that person the much needed help that they need.
I understand this to kind of be your first vying for a police chief job, really anywhere. I guess what do you view the role of a police chief as in terms of accessibility and visibility in the community?
I think it's a priority. They have to hear from me. They have to see me. I will be very accessible. It's interesting because, where I come from, having meetings with the community, having town halls after officer-involved shootings is normal for me. And so that constant communication and meeting and really taking people's difficult questions is something that I value, because we have to hear from the community in order to understand what's happening in the communities in their perspective, and really work to make sure that they understand what we do as law enforcement, what our policies are, what our training encompasses as well. I mean, mental health is a perfect example. How do we train on mental health? Is it crisis intervention training? Is it, time and distance when we get to a call for service, and really trying to make sure that it doesn't escalate to any kind of force being used? I mean, that's something that everybody needs to understand. And so constant communication, constant training for everybody, but listening as well.
Have you got a chance to meet with the union representatives yet? And if so, I guess what was that meeting like?
I did a couple hours ago, and it was very positive. They asked some great questions, and I felt very comfortable with it.
When we're looking at candidates, they're looking sort of closer to internal or external. Do you think at whereas you're a set of fresh eyes as opposed to maybe someone who's more versed with the inner workings of the department already?
I think it's always a good thing to have someone come in with fresh eyes to look at systems at a department like this. I learned things that I didn't even know today that they were doing and they've been doing for a long time. And so I was pleasantly surprised. Having my experience with the mental health conversation, bias reforms or general reforms, as you know, that San Francisco went through a voluntary reform by the DOJ, and that started in 2016. Those are things that I've learned a lot from, and I can bring that to Lincoln, and really, it is a different perspective.
So, going back to recruitment, the culture around police across the country is changing, and it kind of came to a head with George Floyd. How do you recruit people and get people to want to come into the police force? After some negative publication and press in the national media across the country.
Well, first, I'm going to say there's a lot of great officers out there, and painting all law enforcement with a broad brush is not fair. Even those that are calling for defunding the police say that there's some good officers, and I would actually say that there's a lot of great officers out there, and they dedicate their lives to this job. They've risked their lives for others, and it really should be looked at in that manner as well. What happened in the murder of George Floyd, that's not law enforcement. That was an individual's actions, and now he's going to pay that price. So there isn't anybody that I know in law enforcement that would ever say that what happened is okay, and they're appalled as much as I was.
You touched a little bit about how this is sort of the end of your career. If you were to get this position, how long would you hold it? How long do you think police chiefs should sort of stay in that role? Are you hoping to maybe mentor someone or prepare someone to take over when you end your career, maybe in Lincoln?
I don't know how long. It's up to the mayor, but. But I would say that my job as chief would be obviously to mentor, for there to be a competitive race for the job, but also getting people excited about having the job. I mean, it is a difficult job. You have to always be in front of cameras, and you always have to be explaining things that's happening, not only locally but nationally. And so some people don't want to do that, but I do think that my job is to really cultivate our members into taking that next step. And what I saw today, a lot of their experience can take them to that next step. All right, thank you guys.